Hi, everybody. This is the Gospel of John study. My name is Bill from Berlin Center United Methodist. Today's Thursday, July 27th. We are on week 10, day 3. And we're going to be reading from John chapter 19, verses 8 to 16a. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of the preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. All right, I'm going to read now from the text on page 141 and 142. This is the comments from the author Ben Witherington III. Pilate returns to the palace afraid. He asks Jesus where he comes from, and, by the way, the whole exchange had to be in Greek. Pilate would not have known Aramaic or Hebrew, and Jesus was unlikely to have learned Latin. Now, this question is the buzzword question that permeates this whole gospel. Knowing who Jesus is depends on knowing where he came from. Namely, he came from heaven as the only begotten Son of God. This time, Jesus simply refuses to answer the question, which Pilate takes as an insult, and so Pilate threatens Jesus, saying, "Don't you know I have the power to crucify you or set you free?" Jesus doesn't flinch. He suggests that Pilate has only one derived authority, and it was ultimately not given to him by Caesar, but by God. Jesus suggests that since Pilate is flying blind in this matter, those who handed him over are guilty of a bigger sin. For they know more of who Jesus is and what the real situation is. The answer must have pleased Pilate, as we are told that from then on, in this tug of war, he tries to release Jesus, but it is not to be. The Jewish officials play their final trump card, saying if Pilate releases Jesus, then he will be no friend of Caesar. Now, amicus Caesaris was an official status that Pilate desperately wanted to keep. This meant being the emperor on the emperor's good side, in line for a better appointment later. But if the Jewish officials went to the emperor Tiberius, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, and complained about Pilate, this might get him in hot water, because just as he already caused some trouble in the province of Judea, and the emperor was watching, he was the Pax Romana to prevail even in Judea. So Pilate brings out his curule chair, the judgment seat, and sits down at a spot called Gabbatha, and again presents Jesus to the crowd, in essence giving them a choice about his punishment. They shout, "Crucify him." And now, finally, Pilate has been outmaneuvered, and so he says in anger, "Shall I crucify your king?" The crowd infamously says, "We have no king but Caesar," a complete reunification of the patrimony of the Jews and their Davidistic heritage. It was noon on the day of preparation for the Passover, and the real Passover lamb was about to be slaughtered on the appropriate day. It is not clear who, them, is at the end of this segment, but presumably it means his Roman soldiers who worked closely with the Jewish officials. Some of those perhaps who had taken Jesus captive in the garden the previous night. All right, let's look at the questions for today. What motivated Pilate to finally have Jesus crucified? It is important to realize that not all Jews present wanted Jesus crucified. This is not really an attempt to blacken all Jews and make them responsible for Jesus' death. He was executed by Romans. Why then do you think that Christians have wrongly blamed the Jews in general for centuries? And question 3, what did it mean to be a friend of Caesar? All right, until tomorrow, have a great rest of your day.